I'm Aaron Reynolds, creator of Effin Birds, and you're listening to the True North Country Comics podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. On this episode, I chat with Aaron Reynolds about Effin Birds and more in preparation for Toronto Comicon 2024. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel. Toronto Comicon is a spectacular 3-day sci-fi, horror, anime, gaming, and comic book event in Canada that attracts thousands of people to come to the Metro Toronto Convention Centre. Aaron Reynolds is the 4-time Webby Award-winning author of Effin Birds, a comic strip pairing intricate artwork with mundane daily frustrations read by over 1 million people every day. His first book, Effin Birds, A Field Guide to Identification, hit bookstores in 2019, and for 7 whole days was a best-selling book by any Canadian author not named Margaret Atwood. Prior to writing Effin Birds as his full-time gig, Aaron was a creative director for a podcast network, a software trainer for Apple, and a Santa Claus photographer at the Worst Mall in Mississauga, Ontario. Effin Birds is a fan-favorited volume in the grand and noble profession of nature writing and bird identification. Sitting proudly alongside Sibley, Kaufman, and Peterson, this book contains more than 150 pages crammed full of classic monochrome plumage art paired with the delightful but dirty aphorisms, think I'm going to need more booze to deal with this week, that made the Effin Birds feed a household name. Also included in its full Technicolor glory is John James Audubon's most beautiful work matched with modern life advice, including never-before-seen birds, insults, and field notes. This guide is a must-have for any Effin fan or birder. So without further ado, here's my chat with Aaron Reynolds about Effin Birds and more in preparation for Toronto Comicon 2024. So Aaron Reynolds, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, I appreciate your time. I know you're very busy. You just got back from, what was it? It was a Fan Expo Vancouver? My goodness,
Yes.
you're so many stuff, so many shows on the go, and yet here's another one. So before we get to all the questions, I'd like to ask you, what are you reading today in your spare time that you have? What's on your bedside reading table?
So I have 2 different things on the go. I've been reading the book Tinderbox. It's like an oral history of HBO, but everybody who participated in, like, everybody tells their own story in it. Even everybody who got fired tells the story of themselves getting fired. Like, everybody who stabbed somebody else in the back tells the story of stabbing somebody else in the back. Like, it's kind of remarkable that they have everybody involved in it. And so it's a fascinating read, but I've also been reading it for I think 6 months because it's the size of a phone book, and I just got to 2013. Yeah, but I take breaks from it, and I just read, I finally got around to reading all of Brubaker and Phillips's Reckless, which is an absolute delight. It feels like a grittier Magnum PI, I heard that somebody picked up the rights for streaming television, and I hope we get something fantastic out of it because it's such a great series of graphic novels.
Sounds good. Looking forward to that for sure. So we're talking today because you're going to be tabling at Toronto Comicon, yet another convention coming up. So with all this going on, I'm wondering, what is it about conventions that you like the most?
Like a lot of people who make things, I thrive on validation. And so the idea that I sit at a table and people come up to me and tell me that they like something that I did is like, what could be better than that? But cons are really great because they are a place where you can grow audience and meet new people that doesn't exist in the same way anywhere else. It's an audience that's there because they like this stuff already, and so it's much easier than a bookstore signing. You know what I mean? Like, because there's just like a bookstore signing, I have to do all the work to get people there. It's very rare that I meet somebody new at a bookstore signing. I just meet people who are already into what I do. But at a Comic-Con, you make new friends like crazy, and it's just fantastic. And from the back end of it, I really like the family aspect. Like, you end up making a lot of friends, and you go to a lot of weird dinners. After MegaCon, I was in a bar with Jim Shooter for like 3 hours, which is just wild. Jim Shooter stories are the most amazing stories. Buy that man a drink if you get a chance. It's worth it.
That's cool. So I guess that would be top of your favorite memorable convention or festival moments, right? Would that be up there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That and I don't know if you've ever done Dragon Con. Have you ever been to Dragon
I've
Con?
seen it, but I'm scared to go.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's weird.
Yeah.
And did you see there was video last year of somebody reenacted the entire last act of Twister in one of the hotel lobbies?
No
Somebody
way. I
was
got to check
dressed up
that
as a,
out.
yeah, it's so great. It's really great. It's a con that runs like 24 hours. The programming runs 24 hours. And I had a panel at 10:45 at night. And so I'm going to the hotel where the panel is at, and I had to fight my way through an inflatable Tyrannosaurus Rex mosh pit to get to my panel room. And I was like, this is the weirdest convention I've ever been to in my life. I mean, I loved every second of it, but it was weird, and it's its
Yeah.
own experience.
Oh my goodness. Well, something maybe one day I'll get there, but sounds like it's fun. There you go.
Oh, it really is. It really is. You have to like go into it open to experiencing something bizarre. One of my friends, who was essentially my guide on how to survive my first time at Dragon Con, she told me that the only way to do Dragon Con wrong is to look at the schedule and line up for things.
Okay. So definitely the opposite of San Diego Comic Con for sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. The total opposite. Because
Yeah.
I mean, that's a show. That show is kind of inhumane. Like, I get people who like it, but it is. Last year at San Diego, I signed a book every 90 seconds. And like, it's hard to talk to a person in 90 seconds. It's hard to like make a connection with somebody or even like, be a human in 90 seconds.
Hmm.
And like, that's just, and the crazy part is like, I would have 10-minute gaps where nothing was happening. So really my signing time was more like 30 seconds a lot of the
Wow.
time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that was,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's 5 straight days. So it's
Mm,
like, I don't understand how an incredibly famous person does it because
yeah.
it's like, it's got to just be brutal.
Well, here talking about Toronto Comic Con, the show that you'll be at very near future, wondering if you could talk a wee bit about what will be on your table. What will you be showcasing at this con?
Oh yeah. So my second book had a long birth in North America, and part of that was that there was a global pandemic and then a paper shortage and a bunch of other stuff. And part of it was that the second book came out in England, and then people just started importing it. And so my American publisher got a little, itchy about releasing their own version of it 2 years after it had already been on the market somewhere else. And so we ended up turning my second book into a beautiful double deck of playing cards. So
Mm,
imagine taking all my cartoons apart and then making, the Ace of Spades is one of my comics. And it's pretty terrific. And I'm really happy to have them in Toronto. This is I think the first show that I'm going to have them at in Toronto, which is great. And we actually sold the print run out in North America over Christmas. And but I heard the second printing is gonna arrive in time for me to have it at the table. I made some really wild Hawaiian shirts that have a little eagle on them that says, "Oh my God, what the
oh,
um, and they sold out in a day online, but I have about 10 of them, so I'm gonna squirrel those away under my table.
okay. Yeah, some people can hunt those down. Maybe they'll be there. So, do you have any other
Exactly.
projects on the go? I know you're a busy fellow, but what's on your project table there?
Right. So I mean, there's always the daily comic. What's really funny because my own deadlines change for the daily comic. I have all of 2026's comics due around June, around the start of June. And that's because of the needs of the page a day calendars
Mm,
that will be out for 2026. And so I'm always working on that. At the same time, I'm working on two different projects, one of which is called Space Werewolf, which is I think relatively self-explanatory from its title. It is about a failed Soviet moon mission in the late 60s, where they would have been the first men to land on the moon, but the mission had to be covered up because one of the crew members was a werewolf, and they were not aware that it is always full moon on the moon. And then the other thing I'm working on is a strange kind of 80s throwback, almost like a TV action comedy from the 80s called, it looks like it's called The Chimera, but it's called The Chimera because of the way a specific character pronounces it.
okay, okay. Something to look forward to for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe
So,
those will come out in 2027. Who knows?
oh yeah, something down the road. So I wanted to know though, with your art, when you're creating it, do you have a go-to tool that you use these days?
My new favorite thing, I got it about a year ago, and I really liked it, and I kept trying to find a better version of it, and it turns out that I have the best version of it because everything else I've tried has been terrible. And that's a remarkable. Have you ever seen one of those?
Yeah. Yeah. You use that for
Yeah.
drawing?
Yeah, I do, because you know what it does? It gives me a beautiful vector image when I'm done that I
Ah.
can do anything I want in the back in the computer with it. So
Mhm.
it gives me a very paper-like experience when I'm drawing and even when I'm note-taking and writing. Like I use it for a lot of that, and it's actually very good at decoding my terrible handwriting and giving me my notes typed up afterwards. But I also love that because of the pebbled screen and because of the huge number of different styluses out there for it, because it uses that Wacom
Mhm.
EMR technology, I have a pencil that really feels like drawing with a pencil. I mean, it's a wooden pencil, but also the scritch of it on the screen feels like a pencil. And then I have a fountain pen that also feels like a fountain pen. And so it's really wild to like mentally shift gears by changing the thing in my hand, even though all I'm doing is hitting a button also in software.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought it was just good for taking notes, but I didn't know it was also useful for drawing.
It's fantastic. It's really
Wow.
fantastic for it. It's not good for coloring because obviously
No,
it's a
no.
grayscale device.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, especially if you're tired of looking at screens, it's so nice
Mhm.
to have an e-ink screen as a primary device.
Yeah, very useful for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Now, typically at the cons, you're going to get people coming up to your table, and because you're professional, they say, "Hey, give me one piece of advice so I can go off and make my first book." What would you say to this person?
I would say always treat creative things exactly like a job. Have you ever had a day when you didn't want to go to work, you know,
Hmm.
and but you had to go to work anyways?
Yep.
And then you kind of like fake it or whatever, right? You go to work and you just like you put in the time and you do the job. It turns out you can do that with creative things. And you'll in the moment feel like, ugh, I'm faking it. And then sometimes when you look back at it, you're like, nope, I was just in a bad mood. The work is fine. I had to learn that early on because of the grueling schedule of a daily comic. And like, it's fantastic. It has changed my life. I'm like, don't be precious today, Aaron. Go to work. It's time to go to work.
Hmm. Okay. That's good advice for sure.
Oh,
Now, with
thanks.
all your different projects that you have on the go, not only today but tomorrow, where do you recommend that people go online to find out?
Oh, holy moly. One of the easiest is almost everything ends up at effinbirds.com, which is in theory the store for Effin Birds, but there's a lot of other links at the top of that page about, finding where I'm at next and other projects and stuff like that. There's also a link on effinbirds.com. There's a page called Read the Comic that has links to everything else I do. So if you want to find me on Blue Sky or Mastodon or Threads or whatever social media platform, the link is definitely there. I mean, I have an RSS feed for crying out loud. However you want to consume my comic, I will give it to you. And I have a LinkedIn page for Effin Birds. And I've got to say, the comments are so life-giving because someone will reply, ha ha ha, to one of my comics. And then someone else will reply, Peter, don't you know your LinkedIn activity is public? This is putting a bad, it's a bad look for the company that you're liking this disreputable comic. And it's like my favorite thing in the whole world. It's like an act of trolling just being there. Yeah, so you can find that all at effingBirds.com. I do have, because the panels that I do at Comic Cons have been like, I took them all up a notch last year, and I started doing a panel of almost an hour of original material at each show called Bootleg Safari, where we dive deep into horrible knockoff things on the internet. I gave it a YouTube channel and I gave it its own web page. You can go find it at bootlegsafari.com. Or if you get to effingBirds.com, you can click on that, read the comic page, and down at the bottom, it'll have links to all the different ways to watch Bootleg Safari on the internet.
Very good. That sounds like a lot of fun. Aaron, those are all the questions I have for you, but I'm wondering, is there something I didn't ask that you'd like to get across in this interview?
I don't know, man. I did 24 Comic Cons last year, and I just want to say to anybody who's thinking about getting on the Comic Con circuit, 24 is too many. Don't do it. I'm aiming for around 18 this year, and it's February and I'm tired and I'm just like, oh no, what have I done? Maybe I'm gonna do 10 next year. Maybe I'll just pick my favorite 10 and do those.
Thanks to Aaron for the chat. You can discover more about Aaron Reynolds at effinbirds.com. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. Remember to check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel and hit the notification button. You can follow along at True North Country Comics on most social media sites. And you can send any and all feedback to John at truenorthcountrycomics.com. Thanks for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2024.